This establishment has standards. We can't just let anyone stay here. The words sliced through the opulent lobby of Miami's most exclusive resort as the blonde receptionist looked the black woman up and down with obvious disgust, echoing off imported Italian marble floors and beneath crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's cars. But here's what none of them knew. The woman they were refusing service to owned 40 luxury hotels across 3 countries and was about to make this the most expensive act of racism in hospitality history. 6 hours later, she bought the entire resort for $200 million just to fire every single person who discriminated against her. If you also believe that racism has consequences, type justice in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It was 7:45 p.m. on a humid Thursday evening at the Royal Sterling Resort in South Beach, Miami, where the Atlantic Ocean kissed golden sand and where money spoke louder than morality. The automatic glass doors whispered open, revealing a lobby that screamed luxury, every surface polished to mirror perfection, every detail designed to intimidate anyone who wasn't born into wealth. Through those doors walked Serena Williams, at 34 years old, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. Her intelligent, dark eyes swept the space with the practiced assessment of someone who understood hospitality at the deepest level, someone who could evaluate a property's worth in seconds. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, though a few strands had escaped during her cross-country flight, framing her face in a way that softened her determined expression. Serena's charcoal business suit, while clearly expensive and impeccably tailored, showed the telltale signs of 12 hours spent in airports and airplanes. The fabric held subtle wrinkles from extended sitting. Her matching heels clicked softly against the marble as she approached the front desk, pulling behind her a sleek black rolling suitcase. It wasn't the Hermes luggage typically seen gliding across these floors, but it was practical and professional, much like Serena herself. Despite the obvious fatigue from her journey, there was something unmistakably powerful about how Serena moved. Her shoulders remained straight, her chin lifted, carrying the invisible weight of countless boardroom battles and the quiet authority that came from signing paychecks for 15,000 employees. She approached the concierge desk with measured steps, the kind of careful movement that came from someone who had learned to navigate spaces where her presence was often questioned. Behind the imposing marble desk stood Victoria Chase, 28 years old and the embodiment of everything the Royal Sterling considered desirable. Her platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves, clearly the result of a $200 blowout that morning. Not a strand dared escape its designated place. Her manicured nails were painted a flawless nude shade that matched her lipstick, and her makeup was applied with the precision of someone who understood that her appearance was part of her job requirements. But as Serena approached, Victoria's carefully maintained professional mask began to slip. Her blue eyes narrowed as they traveled from Serena's natural hair down to her practical suitcase, lingering with the kind of obvious judgment that made your stomach turn. There was a coldness there, an immediate dismissal that had nothing to do with Serena's qualifications as a guest and everything to do with the color of her skin. "Good evening," Serena said, her voice carrying the warm professionalism of someone accustomed to high-stakes business negotiations, tinged with exhaustion from a day that had started before dawn. "I have a reservation under Williams." The request was simple, straightforward, the kind heard thousands of times daily at luxury hotels around the world. But Victoria's response revealed something ugly, something that would cost her far more than she could imagine. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, though her tone carried not a trace of actual apology. "We're completely booked tonight." But the Royal Sterling's lobby told a different story entirely. The vast space was peaceful, almost serene, with only a handful of guests scattered across its expensive furniture. An elderly couple shared quiet conversation over evening cocktails near the floor-to-ceiling windows. A businessman in a hand-tailored suit worked quietly on his laptop in one of the leather armchairs. The atmosphere was relaxed, unhurried, the kind of calm that only existed when a hotel was nowhere near capacity. Serena noticed this immediately. Her experienced eyes swept the lobby, cataloguing the obvious availability, the relaxed pace of the few visible staff members, the abundance of empty seating. She turned back to Victoria, with a slight frown creasing her brow. "Are you certain?" Serena asked, her voice still polite but carrying a note of confusion that any reasonable person would feel. "It seems quite quiet this evening." And this was where Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing something so ugly, so blatantly prejudiced, that it made you want to reach through the screen. "Ma'am," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this is a 5-star establishment. We maintain certain standards." The implication hung in the air like poison, revealing exactly what Victoria thought about Serena, based solely on her appearance. The irony was devastating. Serena Williams, the woman being told she didn't meet their standards, actually owned 40 luxury hotels across 3 countries and employed more people than the Royal Sterling had ever served. But Victoria Chase didn't know this. As far as Victoria was concerned, she was looking at someone who had somehow wandered into their exclusive space, and Victoria was about to reveal just how deep her prejudices ran. What Victoria didn't know was that she was speaking to a woman who had built her hospitality empire from absolutely nothing. Serena Williams had started 20 years ago as a 16-year-old working double shifts at a budget motel in Detroit, cleaning rooms and folding laundry while studying hospitality management through correspondence courses. She had saved every dollar, skipped every luxury, and invested in herself when no one else would. By 25, Serena had parlayed her savings and an impossible loan into her first small hotel in Cleveland. By 30, she owned 12 properties across the Midwest. By 34, she controlled Williams Hospitality Group, an empire spanning 40 luxury hotels in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, with annual revenues exceeding $3 billion. Her properties were known for something revolutionary in the luxury hospitality industry: genuine, inclusive service that made every guest feel valued regardless of their background. Serena had built her empire on a simple principle: that luxury hospitality should mean exceptional service for everyone, not exclusion based on prejudice. Her hotels were consistently rated among the top properties in their markets, not because they turned people away, but because they welcomed everyone with genuine warmth and professionalism. Standing in that lobby, facing Victoria's barely concealed disgust, Serena was traveling to Miami for a purpose that would make this discrimination even more insulting. Tomorrow morning, she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the International Luxury Hospitality Conference, being held right here at the Royal Sterling Resort. She was the event's primary sponsor, having paid $200,000 to ensure the conference could bring together industry leaders to discuss the future of inclusive luxury service. The conference badge in her briefcase identified her as the morning's featured speaker. The presentation she had spent weeks preparing focused on transforming hospitality culture from exclusion to genuine welcome. Her PowerPoint slides contained case studies from her own properties, showing how inclusive service practices increased both guest satisfaction and profitability. But none of this mattered to Victoria Mitchell, who was operating from pure prejudice, looking at Serena's natural hair, her practical suitcase, her business attire that didn't scream designer labels, and making judgments that were about to cost her everything. What made this moment particularly painful was that Serena had faced this kind of discrimination countless times throughout her journey. Every milestone in building her empire had been accompanied by people who assumed she didn't belong, who questioned her qualifications, who demanded she prove herself in ways that were never required of her white counterparts. But Serena had learned something powerful over the years. She had learned that losing her temper gave people ammunition to use against her, that maintaining her dignity in the face of discrimination was both personally empowering and strategically smart. She had also learned that the best response to prejudice wasn't anger, it was success. Standing there, facing Victoria's obvious disdain, Serena took a deep breath, drawing on 20 years of experience navigating rooms where she was underestimated. She straightened her shoulders, centered herself, and prepared to handle this situation with the same grace and strategic thinking that had built her empire. "Do you need to see my credit card or identification?" Serena asked, reaching into her briefcase to retrieve her corporate American Express Centurion card, the kind reserved for customers with exceptional credit and unlimited spending power. Her driver's license showed an address in Fisher Island, one of Miami's most exclusive neighborhoods, but Victoria didn't even glance at the black metal card that weighed heavy in Serena's hand. Instead, she responded with words that should have ended her career immediately. "I doubt that card is legitimate anyway," Victoria said with a smirk that made you want to throw something at your screen. "We have to be careful about fraud. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Victoria had just accused Serena of financial fraud based on nothing more than the color of her skin. There was no evidence, no reason for suspicion, just pure unadulterated racism delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced consequences for her prejudice. From behind the concierge desk, Blake Morrison, the 31-year-old night supervisor, emerged like a predator sensing opportunity. Blake was the kind of man who wore his mediocrity like a badge of honor, someone who had never achieved anything significant, but felt entitled to judge others. His thinning brown hair was slicked back with too much product, and his cheap cologne couldn't mask the stench of his insecurity. Blake approached with the swagger of someone who thought he was about to solve a problem that would earn him points with management. His eyes swept over Serena with the same obvious disdain that Victoria had shown, but with an added layer of aggressive masculinity that made the situation even more threatening. "What seems to be the issue here?" Blake asked, though his tone made it clear he had already decided Serena was the problem. "Miss Williams is insisting we have availability," Victoria explained, as if Serena's reasonable request was somehow unreasonable, even though she obviously can't afford our rates. The casual cruelty of that statement was breathtaking. Victoria was openly discussing Serena's supposed financial limitations right in front of her, treating her like she wasn't even present, like she was some kind of object to be discussed, rather than a potential guest deserving basic courtesy. Blake nodded with the kind of knowing look that passed between people who shared the same prejudices. "Our nightly rates start at $800, he said, addressing Serena directly with barely concealed condescension. "That's probably more than you're used to spending." The assumption here was staggering. Blake had looked at Serena, a professionally dressed businesswoman carrying legitimate identification and corporate credit cards, and decided she couldn't possibly afford a hotel room that cost $800. He had made this judgment based entirely on her race, without knowing anything about her income, her profession, or her financial status. But Blake wasn't done. While he was delivering this financial insult, Victoria was having her own little conference with Diana Harper, the 29-year-old reservations manager who had appeared from the back office. Diana's dark hair was pulled into a severe bun that matched her severe expression, and her burgundy blazer was tailored to project authority she clearly didn't possess. Diana leaned in close to Victoria, whispering something that made both women suppress laughter. It was the kind of behavior you might expect from high school bullies, not from professional adults working in luxury hospitality. But there they were, treating Serena's presence like it was some kind of joke they were both in on. "She's probably here to case the place," Diana whispered, just loud enough for Serena to hear. Case the place, as in Serena was conducting surveillance for a future robbery. Diana had looked at a well-dressed professional woman requesting a hotel room and decided she must be a criminal. The prejudice was becoming more explicit by the moment. These weren't subtle microaggressions anymore. This was open hostility based purely on racist assumptions. And the worst part was that they seemed to be enjoying themselves, taking pleasure in their ability to exclude someone they considered beneath them. Serena's composure in this moment was remarkable. Any reasonable person would have been furious, would have demanded to speak with a manager, would have threatened to take their business elsewhere. But Serena Williams had faced discrimination before. She knew that losing her cool would only give these people ammunition to use against her. "Is there a manager available?" Serena asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously, despite the humiliation she was enduring. And this was when Ray Coleman decided to make his presence known. The 45-year-old head of security had been watching from across the lobby, and he approached with the kind of aggressive body language designed to intimidate. Ray was a large man who had clearly spent years using his physical presence to solve problems, and his movement towards Serena was deliberate, calculated to make her feel threatened. "Lady," Ray said, his voice low and menacing, "you heard them. There's no room for you here. Time to move along." The threat was unmistakable. Ray wasn't asking Serena to leave. He was preparing to physically remove her. His hand rested casually on his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. His positioning between Serena and the lobby exit was strategic, designed to control her movement and limit her options. But just when you thought this situation couldn't get any worse, just when you thought these employees had revealed the full extent of their prejudice, Marcus Bradford himself decided to make an appearance. The general manager emerged from his office like a king surveying his domain. At 52 years old, Bradford had the bearing of a man who had never been challenged, never been held accountable for his actions. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair impeccably styled, his entire presence designed to project superiority and control. But the moment Bradford's eyes landed on Serena, his expression shifted to one of immediate hostility. He didn't see a potential guest. He didn't see a businesswoman seeking accommodation. He saw a black woman in his lobby, and that was all the information he needed. "What's this commotion about?" Bradford demanded, his voice carrying the irritation of someone whose valuable time was being wasted. Victoria, eager to curry favor with her boss, jumped in with her version of events. "This woman won't leave," she reported, as if Serena was some kind of trespasser rather than a customer seeking service. "She's demanding a room even though we've explained our standards." Victoria was framing Serena as unreasonable and aggressive, setting Bradford up to see her as a problem to be solved rather than a guest to be served. And Bradford, showing that the rot in this hotel went all the way to the top, didn't disappoint. He looked Serena up and down with the kind of obvious disdain that would have been shocking in any professional setting, sizing her up like she was something unpleasant he had found on his shoe. "Ma'am," Bradford said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I think you're confused about what kind of establishment this is." The implication was clear and devastating. Bradford was suggesting that Serena had somehow wandered into his luxury hotel by mistake, that she didn't understand the caliber of property she was trying to access. It was classism and racism rolled into one ugly package, delivered with the casual cruelty that suggested this wasn't Bradford's first time making such comments. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the budget motels on the highway," Bradford continued, his smug smile revealing exactly what he thought about Serena's worth as a potential guest. "They're more suited to people in your situation." The phrase "people in your situation" was code, and everyone in that lobby knew it. Bradford was making assumptions about Serena's financial status, her social class, her very worth as a human being, based entirely on her appearance. And he was doing it with the confidence of someone who thought there would be no consequences. Serena, maintaining the composure that had served her well in countless business negotiations, took a deep breath and made one final attempt at reasonable customer service. "Sir, I have valid identification and payment. I'm simply requesting a room for the evening." And this was when Bradford delivered the response that sealed his fate and the fate of every employee who had participated in this discrimination. "Ma'am," Bradford said with finality, "you need to leave this property immediately before we call the police." The threat was explicit now. They weren't just denying her service, they were threatening her with arrest for the crime of requesting a hotel room while being black. But Serena Williams had one more card to play, and when she played it, it was going to destroy every single person who had humiliated her. "I'll be making some phone calls," Serena said calmly, "then I'll be back." As Serena walked toward the lobby exit, with the same dignity she had entered with, every eye in the Royal Sterling's opulent space was watching. The elderly couple by the windows had stopped their quiet conversation, their faces showing the kind of shock that came from witnessing something they couldn't quite believe. The businessman with the laptop had looked up from his screen, his expression uncomfortable, as he processed what he had just witnessed. These weren't casual observers. These were guests who had paid premium prices to stay at what they believed was a professional establishment, and they had just watched the hotel's management engage in the kind of blatant discrimination that belonged in history books, not modern luxury hospitality. The woman at the window table leaned toward her husband, her voice carrying in the marble lobby's acoustics. "Did they just refuse service to that woman because she's black?" Her husband's response was equally audible and equally damning. "In 2024, I can't believe what I just saw." But while the legitimate guests were processing their shock and discomfort, the hotel staff was having an entirely different reaction, and what they said next made your blood boil all over again. Victoria Chase, the blonde concierge who had started this nightmare, was practically glowing with satisfaction. She leaned against the marble desk, chatting with Blake Morrison, like they had just accomplished something worthy of celebration. "Good riddance," Victoria said, her voice carrying the smugness of someone who thought she had successfully protected her territory. "These people always think they deserve special treatment." Even with Serena gone, even when she thought no one was listening, Victoria couldn't help but reveal the depth of her prejudice. She was genuinely pleased that she had denied service to a black woman, proud of her role in what she saw as maintaining the hotel's exclusive atmosphere. Blake Morrison, not to be outdone in the cruelty department, added his own observation. "Did you see that cheap suitcase she was pulling? Probably got it at a discount store." The pettiness was breathtaking. Blake was critiquing Serena's luggage now, as if the brand of someone's suitcase determined their worth as a human being. But this comment revealed something deeper, the assumption that black people couldn't afford quality items, that their very presence in upscale spaces must be some kind of mistake or deception. Diana Harper, the reservations manager who had whispered her cruel jokes, joined the conversation with her own racist commentary. "At least she's gone," Diana said with obvious relief. "Now we can focus on real guests." Real guests. Even after what they had just done, Diana still didn't see anything wrong with denying service to a black woman. In her mind, they had successfully protected their hotel from someone who didn't deserve to be there, someone whose money wasn't as valuable as their white guests' money. Ray Coleman, the security guard who had been ready to physically remove Serena, added his own regret to this festival of racism. "Should have let me escort her out from the start," he muttered, cracking his knuckles like he was disappointed he hadn't gotten to use physical force. The casual violence in that statement was chilling. Ray was actually disappointed that he hadn't gotten to put his hands on a woman whose only crime had been requesting a hotel room while being black, and Marcus Bradford, the general manager who should have been ensuring professional service, instead revealed his own satisfaction with how the situation had been handled. "That's exactly why we have standards," Bradford announced to his staff, as if what they had just done was something to be proud of. "We can't let just anyone think they belong here." Just anyone. Bradford was making it crystal clear that in his mind, certain people didn't belong in his hotel, regardless of their ability to pay or their conduct. And those certain people were black people. But while Bradford and his staff were congratulating themselves on their successful act of discrimination, they had no idea that they had just made the most expensive mistake in hospitality history. They were about to learn that actions had consequences, that racism cost careers, and that the woman they had just humiliated had the power to destroy all of their lives with a single phone call. The celebration in that lobby was about to become a wake for 5 careers that were already dead. Bradford, Victoria, Blake, Diana, and Ray just didn't know it yet. As Serena stepped into the humid Miami evening, the warm ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and expensive cologne from nearby South Beach restaurants, she pulled out her phone with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from controlled fury that had been building for the past 30 minutes. This wasn't nervousness. This was the righteous anger of someone who had spent 20 years fighting discrimination only to face it in its most blatant form. What Bradford and his racist staff didn't know was that they had just humiliated one of the most powerful women in American hospitality. Serena Williams had built her empire from absolutely nothing, starting as a 16-year-old immigrant whose family had fled poverty in Jamaica with dreams of American opportunity. Her journey began in a roach-infested studio apartment in Detroit, where she lived with her grandmother while working 16-hour days at a budget motel near the airport. She cleaned rooms, scrubbed toilets, and folded thousands of towels, while studying hospitality management through correspondence courses that she paid for with tips and overtime money. By 18, Serena had saved enough to enroll in community college while continuing to work full-time in hotels. She wasn't studying hospitality from textbooks, she was living it, learning that genuine service meant treating every guest with dignity, regardless of their appearance or perceived social status. She watched managers who cared more about exclusion than excellence, and promised herself that if she ever had the power, she would do things differently. The first hotel Serena purchased at 25 was a failing 60-room property in Cleveland that she bought with her life savings and an impossible loan that required her grandmother's house as collateral. She spent 2 years personally renovating every room, working 18-hour days to transform a declining property into something special. But what made Serena's hotel different wasn't the renovated rooms or the new carpeting. It was the culture she created. Her staff were trained to see every guest as valuable, to look beyond appearances and assumptions. Her front desk never questioned someone's ability to pay based on their race or clothing. Her security never intimidated guests who looked different. That first hotel's success led to a second, then a third. Within 10 years, Serena controlled 12 properties across the Midwest. By 30, she had expanded internationally, opening luxury resorts in Toronto and Cancun. By 34, Williams Hospitality Group owned 40 properties, employed 15,000 people, and generated $3 billion in annual revenue. But success hadn't made Serena forget where she came from or the discrimination she had faced. Every property in her portfolio operated under the same principle that had guided her since Detroit. Treat every human being with dignity because you never know who you're serving. Her hotels were consistently rated among the top properties in their markets, not because they excluded people, but because they genuinely welcomed everyone. The irony of what had just happened at the Royal Sterling was devastating. Serena was in Miami to deliver tomorrow morning's keynote address at the International Luxury Hospitality Conference, right here at the resort that had just refused her service. She was the event's primary sponsor, the featured speaker, who was going to address industry leaders about transforming hospitality culture from exclusion to inclusion. Her presentation was titled, "The Future of Luxury Service: Dignity for Every Guest," and her PowerPoint slides contained case studies showing how inclusive practices increased both guest satisfaction and profitability. She had planned to use her own properties as examples of how luxury and inclusivity could coexist. Standing in that parking lot under the glow of expensive landscape lighting, Serena felt the weight of every slight she had endured, every door that had been closed in her face, every time someone had assumed she didn't belong somewhere. But she also felt something else, the power that came from 20 years of building something that could not be taken away. Tomorrow she would stand on the Royal Sterling's conference stage and address 300 hospitality executives about the importance of treating every guest with respect. But tonight, she was going to teach Bradford and his staff a lesson they would never forget about the cost of racism in business. But Serena wasn't done, not by a long shot. Her phone contained the contact information of some of the most powerful people in American business, and she was about to use every single one of those connections. The first call Serena made set everything in motion. "Michael Thompson," she said when the call connected, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I need you to prepare an acquisition offer for the Royal Sterling Resort in Miami." Michael Thompson, the CFO of Williams Hospitality Group, didn't question the urgency in Serena's voice. He had worked with her long enough to know that when Serena Williams called with specific instructions, something serious was happening. "How much are we talking?" Thompson asked, his fingers already moving across his laptop keyboard. $200 million. "Cash," Serena replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just made a decision that would reshape the Miami hospitality landscape. "I want it done tonight." $200 million wasn't just money, it was a nuclear weapon in corporate terms. It was the kind of offer that made boards of directors abandon family dinners and catch red-eye flights. It was the kind of number that transformed a quiet Thursday evening into the most important night in a company's history. "I'll need 6 hours for due diligence," Thompson replied, "but I can have preliminary papers ready in 2. What triggered this acquisition?" "They just refused me service based on my race," Serena explained, her voice now carrying the cold fury of someone who had been pushed too far. "I want to own this property by tomorrow morning so I can fire everyone who participated." Thompson's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. He understood immediately that this wasn't just a business acquisition. This was corporate justice, being served with compound interest. "I'll mobilize the entire legal team," he said. "How hostile do you want this to be?" "Completely hostile," Serena replied. "I want them to understand that racism has consequences, that you can't discriminate against people and think there won't be a price to pay." While Serena was orchestrating what would become the most expensive act of corporate revenge in hospitality history, inside the Royal Sterling, the staff was having their own little celebration, and what they were saying made you want to reach through the screen and shake some sense into them. Bradford had gathered his management team in his office, ostensibly to debrief the incident, but really to congratulate themselves on what they saw as successfully maintaining their standards. "That's exactly how we handle those situations," Bradford announced to Victoria, Blake and Diana, as if denying service to black customers was official hotel policy. "We maintain our reputation by being selective about our clientele." Victoria practically preened under the praise. "She had probably saved us from trouble." she agreed. She obviously didn't belong here. Blake Morrison, drunk on the attention, added his own theory about the encounter. People like that always try to intimidate their way into places they can't afford, hoping we'll give them something for free. The racist assumptions were flowing freely now, with no customers present to witness their true attitudes. Diana Harper chimed in with her own observation. It's good that we stood firm. Otherwise, word gets out and suddenly everyone thinks they can just walk in here. Everyone in Diana's lexicon clearly meant black people. People who, in her mind, didn't deserve access to luxury hospitality, regardless of their ability to pay or their conduct. But while Bradford's staff was congratulating itself on its successful discrimination, they had no idea that their careers were already over. They were like passengers on the Titanic, celebrating the smooth sailing 30 minutes after hitting the iceberg. Ray Coleman, who had been standing guard in the lobby, returned to Bradford's office with his own contribution to this racist conference. She's probably calling her friends to complain, he reported, as if Serena's phone calls were some kind of impotent protest. Nothing's going to come of it. If Ray had only known what those phone calls were accomplishing, he would have gotten on his knees and begged for forgiveness. But Ray was operating under the assumption that black customers had no recourse, no power, no ability to fight back against discrimination. What none of them realized was that outside in the parking lot, Serena was assembling a corporate army that was about to descend on their property like the wrath of God. Her second call had been to Jenkins Morrison and Associates, the most aggressive acquisition firm in Florida. Her third call had been to First National Bank's commercial lending division, authorizing the release of $200 million in acquisition funds. By the time Bradford finished his racist celebration, Serena had made 8 phone calls and set in motion a corporate takeover that would be studied in business schools for decades. The first sign that something was wrong came exactly 47 minutes after Serena had left the Royal Sterling Resort. A black Mercedes S-Class pulled up to the valet stand, followed by a second, then a third. These weren't the typical luxury vehicles that graced the resort's entrance. These were the kind of cars that transported people who made million-dollar decisions before lunch. From the first, Mercedes emerged 3 men in expensive suits who moved with the purposeful stride of people who were there on serious business. From the second car came 4 more similarly dressed individuals carrying leather briefcases and the kind of confidence that came from representing major financial institutions. The third vehicle disgorged a woman and 2 men who looked like they could buy and sell hotels before their morning coffee. Bradford, who happened to be walking through the lobby when this convoy arrived, felt the first stirrings of unease. Something about this arrival felt different from the typical wealthy guests who frequented his resort. These people weren't here for vacation or leisure. They were here for business, and they looked like they meant it. Victoria, at the front desk, watched the parade of expensive suits with growing curiosity. "What kind of meeting requires this many executives at 8:30 on a Thursday evening?" she whispered to Blake, who had joined her behind the marble counter. Before Blake could answer, the lead figure from the first Mercedes approached the concierge desk. His name was David Morrison, senior partner at Jenkins Morrison and Associates, and his expression could have frozen tropical punch. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardroom warfare. "I need to speak with your general manager immediately regarding an urgent business matter." The formality in Morrison's voice should have been Bradford's first warning. This wasn't a guest request. This was a corporate summons delivered with the precision of someone who had done this before, someone who specialized in acquisitions that happened whether the target wanted them to or not. Bradford approached with the swagger of someone who still thought he controlled his own domain, though there was a tremor of uncertainty in his voice that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "I'm Marcus Bradford, General Manager," he announced, extending his hand in what he hoped was a gesture of authority. "How can I assist you?" Morrison didn't shake the offered hand. Instead, he placed a thick manila folder on the marble counter between them. "Mr. Bradford, I represent Williams Hospitality Group. We're prepared to make an immediate cash offer for the Royal Sterling Resort." The words hit Bradford like a physical blow. Williams Hospitality Group, he knew that name. Every hotel executive in America knew that name. They owned 40 properties, generated billions in revenue, and were known for aggressive expansion strategies. But what was their connection to his hotel? $200 million cash, Morrison continued, his voice as steady as if he were ordering lunch, with closing anticipated within 6 hours. $200 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. It was more than the Royal Sterling was worth, more than its parent company had ever imagined receiving for a single property. It was the kind of offer that made boards of directors abandon whatever they were doing and converge on a property immediately. Bradford's mouth went dry as the implications began to sink in. "Why?" he managed to ask, his voice cracking slightly. "Why would Williams Hospitality want to acquire us?" Morrison's smile was the kind you saw on predators just before they struck. "Let's just say they have a very personal interest in this property and its management practices." Very personal interest. Bradford's mind raced, trying to understand what could have triggered this corporate earthquake. Why would one of America's largest hospitality companies suddenly decide they needed to own his hotel? And why tonight? Why the urgent timeline? Why the mention of management practices? Behind Bradford, Victoria, Blake and Diana were exchanging nervous glances. They had heard Morrison's words about management practices, and something cold was beginning to form in the pit of their stomachs. Could this somehow be connected to that woman they had turned away? But that was impossible, wasn't it? She had just been some random black woman trying to get a room she couldn't afford. What they didn't know was that their random black woman was currently sitting in a Bentley Continental GT in the resort's parking lot, watching through tinted windows as her corporate army began the process of destroying their careers. She had spent the last hour making the kind of phone calls that moved mountains, and what was happening inside that lobby was just the beginning. The Royal Sterling's marble lobby began to transform into a corporate battlefield as more vehicles arrived, creating a scene that belonged in a financial thriller rather than a luxury resort. By 9:15 p.m., the valet stand looked like a summit of the most powerful business leaders in Florida. A convoy of Range Rovers deposited 6 attorneys from Blackstone Legal Associates, Miami's most feared corporate law firm. They moved through the lobby like sharks who had detected blood in the water, carrying briefcases filled with acquisition documents, non-disclosure agreements, and termination contracts. Behind them came representatives from First National Bank's commercial division, authorized to wire $200 million on command. These weren't junior associates. These were senior vice presidents who typically handled Fortune 500 transactions, people who didn't leave their Coral Gables mansions unless the deal involved at least 9 figures. The final arrival was the most ominous. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom that deposited Helen Richardson, senior managing partner at Richardson Associates, the acquisition specialists who had orchestrated some of the most ruthless corporate takeovers in American business history. Helen was a woman who collected companies like other people collected art, and her presence meant that someone with serious money wanted the Royal Sterling badly. Bradford stood in the center of his lobby, feeling like a man watching his own funeral. As each new wave of executives entered his resort, his confident demeanor crumbled a little more. These weren't people who made social calls or conducted routine business meetings. These were corporate predators, and they were circling his property like vultures. Morrison took control of the situation with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "Mr. Bradford," he announced, his voice carrying across the marble lobby, "we'll need the Windsor Conference Room for our discussions." The Windsor Conference Room was the Royal Sterling's most exclusive meeting space, a place where Bradford had hosted celebrity weddings and Fortune 500 board meetings. But tonight, it was going to witness something unprecedented. The complete destruction of his career and the careers of everyone who had participated in discriminating against Serena Williams. As the executives filed toward the conference room, Bradford caught sight of documents being removed from briefcases. Stock purchase agreements, cash transfer authorizations, board resolutions. These people weren't here to negotiate. They were here to acquire. Victoria approached Bradford with the kind of nervous energy that came from sensing impending disaster. "Sir," she whispered, "what's happening? Why are all these people here?" Bradford couldn't answer because he didn't know. The only clue was Morrison's mention of management practices and a very personal interest from Williams Hospitality Group. But what could possibly connect his hotel to one of America's largest hospitality companies? The answer was currently sitting in that Bentley in the parking lot, but Bradford wouldn't learn that for another 23 minutes. 23 minutes during which his world would continue to crumble as more evidence of the corporate takeover assembled in his conference room. Thompson, Morrison's colleague, emerged from the Windsor conference room with an update that made Bradford's blood pressure spike. "We have preliminary approval from Williams Hospitality's board of directors," he announced. "Funding is confirmed and ready for immediate transfer." Immediate transfer meant they weren't playing games. They had $200 million waiting to purchase his hotel, and they wanted the transaction completed tonight. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a corporate execution being carried out with military precision. But why? Bradford kept asking himself. What had triggered this sudden interest in his property? What management practices had Morrison mentioned? And why did this feel less like a business opportunity and more like a reckoning? The answer was walking through the lobby doors at that very moment. Serena Williams entered the Royal Sterling for the second time that evening, but now everything had changed. She wasn't the same woman who had been humiliated an hour earlier. She was flanked by Michael Thompson, her CFO, and two senior attorneys from her legal team, moving with the authority of someone who controlled billions in assets. Bradford watched this procession with growing confusion. The woman they had ejected was returning, but she was accompanied by what appeared to be high-level corporate executives. How was this possible? The woman they had refused service to had been just another black customer trying to get a room she couldn't afford, hadn't she? Victoria's face drained of color as terrible recognition began to dawn. She had seen news coverage of Williams Hospitality Group's aggressive expansion, and something about the approaching woman looked devastatingly familiar. But it couldn't be, could it? The woman they had humiliated couldn't possibly be connected to this corporate invasion. Blake Morrison was the first to voice what they were all thinking. "Sir," he whispered to Bradford, his voice cracking with fear, "that woman looks exactly like the one we turned away. But that's impossible." Blake was beginning to understand that nothing was impossible anymore, that they had made a mistake so catastrophic it defied comprehension. But his brain was refusing to process the implications, because accepting the truth meant accepting that everything he thought he knew about power and consequence was about to be shattered. Morrison, the lead acquisition attorney, approached Bradford with documents in hand. "Mr. Bradford, these are the final purchase agreements. Williams Hospitality Group now owns this property, effective immediately." The words hit Bradford like a wrecking ball. Williams Hospitality Group owned his hotel. They had purchased the Royal Sterling Resort in less than 2 hours, with a speed and efficiency that spoke to unlimited resources and absolute determination. But why? What had triggered this corporate earthquake? And then Morrison delivered the information that made Bradford's world collapse entirely. The new owner requested this acquisition personally, after experiencing what she described as the most blatant discrimination she had encountered in 20 years of business travel. Bradford's eyes shot to Serena Williams, who was watching his reaction with the calm satisfaction of someone who had just checkmate her opponent in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The woman he had insulted, the woman he had told didn't belong, the woman whose race he had used to justify denying service. She hadn't just complained to some corporate hotline. She had bought his entire hotel to fire him. Morrison let the silence stretch, letting Bradford absorb the full implications of what was happening before delivering the final devastating blow. "Mr. Bradford, I'd like you to formally meet your new employer." Bradford looked at Serena Williams with the same dismissive expression he had worn all evening, still somehow unable to process that the woman he had humiliated now controlled his fate. His prejudice had blinded him so completely that even with corporate executives filling his lobby, even with purchase agreements bearing her signature, he couldn't accept the reality of who she was. Morrison's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering long-overdue justice. "This is Serena Williams, CEO and majority owner of Williams Hospitality Group, which as of 37 minutes ago owns this resort and every person employed by it." The transformation in Bradford's expression was almost comical, if it weren't so pathetic. His arrogant confidence crumbled like a house of cards, his face cycling through disbelief, terror, and finally desperate calculation as he tried to find some way to salvage the unsalvageable. Victoria Mitchell, behind the concierge desk, was experiencing her own moment of horrific clarity. The woman she had told didn't meet their standards owned 40 luxury hotels. The woman she had accused of carrying a fake credit card employed 15,000 people. The woman she had sneered at controlled $3 billion in assets. Blake Morrison's legs nearly gave out as the magnitude of their mistake hit him. The customer he had insulted about room rates had just spent $200 million to purchase their hotel for the express purpose of firing everyone who had discriminated against her. Diana Harper, who had whispered jokes about Serena casing the place, was now understanding that the only person who had been robbed tonight was herself, robbed of her career, her reputation, and her future in hospitality by her own racist assumptions. Ray Coleman, the security guard who had threatened to physically remove Serena, was backing toward the wall as if he could somehow escape the reckoning that was about to unfold. His intimidation tactics had been used against someone who could end his career with a phone call. But Serena wasn't finished. She had spent 2 hours orchestrating this moment, and she was going to savor every second of watching these people understand the true cost of their racism. "Miss Mitchell," Serena said, her voice carrying across the lobby with perfect clarity, "would you like to repeat what you said to me about this establishment's standards?" Victoria's response was pathetic in its desperation. "Miss Williams, I didn't know, I didn't realize. If I had known who you were..." And here's where Serena delivered the moral lesson that would echo through the hospitality industry for years to come. "So your discrimination was conditional?" Serena asked, her voice sharp with controlled fury. "You only refused service to black people who couldn't fire you? Your racism had a wealth threshold?" The question exposed the ugly truth that Victoria was revealing without even realizing it. Her apology wasn't about understanding the fundamental wrongness of discrimination. It was about getting caught discriminating against someone with power. It wasn't genuine remorse. It was damage control. "Mr. Morrison," Serena continued, turning to Blake, "you questioned my ability to afford an $800 room. I'm curious what you think about my ability to afford a $200 million hotel." Blake's stammered response revealed everything about the assumptions he had made. "Miss Williams, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "I never meant..." "You meant exactly what you said," Serena interrupted, refusing to let anyone minimize their actions or hide behind weak excuses. "You looked at a black woman and assumed she was poor, assumed she was lying, assumed she didn't belong. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was racism in its purest form. The corporate executives who had facilitated this acquisition were taking notes, documenting everything for the legal proceedings that would follow. This wasn't just about firing racist employees. This was about creating a case study in consequences that would be studied in business schools for decades." Serena turned her attention to Diana Harper with the focused intensity of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, methodically building her case against each person who had participated in her humiliation. "Miss Harper, you suggested I was here to case the place. You looked at a black woman requesting a hotel room and assumed I was conducting surveillance for a robbery. Please explain the evidence that led you to that conclusion." Diana's voice cracked under the pressure. I didn't mean it like that. I was just..." "You meant exactly like that," Serena interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 20 years breaking down barriers in boardrooms and business negotiations. "You saw my skin color and immediately assumed criminal intent. That's not a communication error, that's racism." Serena's legal team was documenting everything, creating a record that would follow these employees for the rest of their careers. Every racist comment, every discriminatory action, every assumption based on prejudice was being catalogued for future background checks. "Ray Coleman," Serena continued, fixing the security guard with a stare that made him shrink against the marble wall, "you were eager to use physical force against a customer making a reasonable request for service. What exactly about my behavior warranted the threat of violence?" Ray's attempt at an explanation revealed the depth of his prejudice. "I was just following protocol for dealing with difficult guests." "I wasn't difficult," Serena replied, her voice cutting through his excuse like a scalpel. "I was polite. I had valid identification. I had legitimate payment. What made me difficult in your mind, Ray?" The silence that followed answered the question more clearly than any words could. Ray couldn't explain what made her difficult, because there was only one answer. Her race had made her automatically suspicious in his mind, automatically undeserving of basic courtesy. "Mr. Bradford," Serena said, turning to face the general manager who had started this confrontation by suggesting she belonged at a highway motel, "you told me our rooms cost more than I made in a month. You directed me to budget accommodations based on nothing but assumptions about my financial status. Please tell this room what evidence you used to determine my income level." Bradford's desperation erupted in exactly the kind of defensive response that revealed his true character. "This is all a misunderstanding, Miss Williams. If we had known who you were, we would never have—" There it was, the admission that destroyed any possibility of redemption. Bradford had just confessed that his hotel provided different levels of service based on who people were, that their courtesy was conditional, their respect reserved for people they deemed worthy. "Let me be clear about something, Mr. Bradford," Serena said, her voice now carrying the cold authority of someone delivering a corporate death sentence. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you treated any customer the way you treated me tonight." She paused, letting that sink in, letting every person in that lobby understand that this wasn't about her personal wealth or corporate power. This was about basic human dignity. "I don't care if I had been a teacher, a nurse, a student, or someone genuinely struggling financially," Serena continued. "No human being deserves to be discriminated against based on their race. No customer should be denied service because of the color of their skin." The moral lesson was landing with devastating precision. Serena wasn't seeking revenge for a personal slight. She was demonstrating the consequences of institutional racism, the price that must be paid when businesses normalize discrimination. Victoria's sobbing intensified as she realized that her career hadn't just hit a roadblock, it had driven off a cliff at full speed. Blake Morrison was backing toward the lobby exit, as if he could somehow escape the professional destruction that was already complete. Diana Harper looked like she was going to be physically sick as the implications of documented racism sank in, but Serena wasn't finished. She had spent 2 hours assembling the corporate firepower to make this moment possible, and she was going to ensure that every lesson was learned, every consequence was delivered. "Security footage from this evening has been preserved," Serena announced, her voice carrying across the lobby with perfect clarity. "Every racist comment, every discriminatory action, every assumption based on prejudice has been documented." She gestured toward her legal team, who were indeed holding tablets displaying the evening's recorded interactions. "This documentation will be included in your employment files, which will be made available to any future employers who request references. Your racism tonight wasn't just morally wrong, it was economically stupid, because it's about to cost you everything you've worked for." The transformation from confident discrimination to terrified unemployment was complete. Bradford and his staff had gone from celebrating their successful exclusion of an undesirable customer to facing the complete destruction of their careers. And the most beautiful part was that they had done it to themselves. Thompson stepped forward with a leather portfolio containing the documents that would formalize the complete destruction of Bradford's world. "Mr. Bradford, these are the final ownership transfer papers. Williams Hospitality Group officially owns the Royal Sterling Resort as of 9:47 p.m. tonight." The finality in Thompson's voice was devastating. Bradford wasn't just losing his job, he was losing his entire world. The hotel he had managed for 8 years, the staff he had trained, the reputation he had built, all of it was now controlled by the woman he had humiliated. But the true scope of Serena's power was about to be revealed in a way that would leave everyone in that lobby speechless. "The purchase price was $200 million cash," Thompson continued, his voice carrying across the marble lobby like a judge delivering a sentence. "Paid in full from Williams Hospitality Group's acquisition fund, specifically allocated for properties where discrimination has been documented. $200 million. Not financed, not leveraged, not negotiated." Serena Williams had spent $200 million in cash to purchase a hotel for the express purpose of firing racist employees. The number was so staggering, it redefined what corporate justice looked like. Victoria's legs nearly buckled as she processed what she was hearing. This woman had spent more money in 3 hours than Victoria would earn in 20 lifetimes. And she had done it specifically to punish the discrimination they had shown her. Blake Morrison's face had gone completely white as he realized that his moment of racist superiority had triggered the most expensive act of corporate revenge in hospitality history. His comments about $800 room rates had been made to someone who had just spent $200 million to teach him a lesson. But Serena wasn't finished revealing the full extent of her power. "Miss Mitchell," Serena said, addressing Victoria directly, "you accused me of carrying a fraudulent credit card. You suggested I couldn't afford your rates. I'm curious what you think about my ability to purchase your employer." Victoria couldn't respond because there were no words for the magnitude of her mistake. She had questioned the financial credibility of someone who controlled more wealth than most small countries. "Mr. Morrison," Serena continued, turning to Blake, "you were concerned about my ability to pay $800 for a room. How do you feel about my ability to pay $200 million to fire you?" Blake's stammered attempt at an apology revealed everything about how completely he had misunderstood the situation. "Miss Williams, I had no idea. You never imagined that a black woman could have real power," Serena replied, cutting through his pathetic excuses. "You never imagined that your racism could have consequences. You never imagined that the person you were discriminating against might have the resources to destroy your career." The lesson was being delivered with surgical precision. Every assumption these employees had made about race and power was being systematically destroyed. Every stereotype they had relied on was crumbling before their eyes. Ray Coleman, who had been ready to physically remove Serena, was now backing toward the lobby exit as if he could somehow escape the corporate justice that was about to fall on him. But there was nowhere to run from what was coming. Diana Harper, who had suggested Serena was casing the place, was experiencing her own moment of horrific clarity. The only crime that had been committed tonight was their discrimination, and the only people who were going to pay for it were themselves. Bradford made one last desperate attempt to salvage his career. "Miss Williams, surely we can discuss this situation like professionals. There has to be some way to resolve this misunderstanding." Serena's response was ice-cold and absolutely final. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Bradford. You discriminated against me based on my race. You denied me service because of the color of my skin. You threatened me with arrest for requesting basic customer service. There is nothing to discuss and nothing to negotiate." She paused, letting the finality of that statement sink in. "Your employment is terminated immediately. All of your employments are terminated immediately. If you're loving watching racists face the consequences of their actions, hit that subscribe button right now, because the individual firings that come next are going to be even more satisfying than what you've seen so far." The moment of ultimate justice had arrived. 5 careers were about to be destroyed with the same casual cruelty that their owners had shown to a customer whose only crime was being black in their establishment. And every single consequence was going to be detailed, documented, and devastating. The individual destructions began immediately, and they were more satisfying than watching dominoes fall in perfect sequence. Serena addressed each employee personally, ensuring that every racist action received its corresponding consequence. "Mr. Bradford, your employment is terminated effective immediately," Serena announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just purchased the right to deliver justice. 15 years of management experience ended by 15 minutes of racism. Bradford's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally desperate panic as the reality sank in. "But, Miss Williams, surely we can discuss severance, some kind of transition period." "There will be no severance package," Serena replied, her voice as cold as Arctic wind. "There will be no positive references. There will be no transition period. You discriminated against customers based on race, which violates federal civil rights laws." Thompson stepped forward with Bradford's termination paperwork already prepared. "Your final paycheck will reflect payment through today only," he announced. "No accrued vacation, no benefits continuation, no company recommendations. Your racist behavior tonight has forfeited any claim to professional courtesy." The speed and efficiency of Bradford's destruction was breathtaking. In less than 10 minutes, he had gone from being a successful hotel general manager to being unemployed, unemployable, and facing potential federal civil rights violations. "Miss Mitchell," Serena continued, turning her attention to Victoria, "your racist comments about establishment standards have been recorded on security cameras, documented by witnesses, and will be included in any background check conducted by future employers." Victoria's sobbing intensified as she realized that this moment was going to follow her for the rest of her career. Every job application, every interview, every attempt to rebuild her life in hospitality would be haunted by this evening's documented racism. Your suggestion that I try the homeless shelter, your accusation that my credit card was fraudulent, your assumption that people like me don't belong in luxury establishments, Serena continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. These weren't momentary lapses in judgment, Victoria. These were expressions of deep-seated racism that make you unsuitable for any customer-facing position. Victoria tried to speak, tried to offer some kind of explanation, but what could she say? How do you apologize for racism? How do you explain away discrimination based on skin color? How do you justify suggesting that a black woman belongs in a homeless shelter? Mr. Morrison, Blake's termination was equally swift and devastating. Your comments about my financial status, your assumptions about my ability to afford your services, your condescending lecture about room rates, all documented, all recorded, all career-ending. Blake's legs gave out, and he sank into one of the lobby's expensive leather chairs as the magnitude of his situation hit him. He had insulted the financial capacity of someone who had just spent $200 million specifically to fire him. The irony was so complete, it felt like cosmic justice. Miss Harper, Serena turned to Diana, whose racist jokes were about to cost her everything. Your suggestion that I was here to case the place, your assumption that a black woman requesting a room must be planning a crime, your whispered commentary about maintaining standards, all of it documented, all of it grounds for immediate termination. Diana's attempt at an explanation revealed how little she understood about the gravity of her situation. I was just trying to protect the hotel's reputation. You were perpetuating racist stereotypes, Serena replied, cutting through Diana's pathetic excuse. You looked at a black customer and immediately assumed criminal intent. That's not protecting anything. That's destroying the reputation of any business that employs you. Ray Coleman, the security guard who had been so eager to use physical intimidation, received his own personalized destruction. Your threats of violence against a customer making a reasonable request, your eagerness to use physical force, your intimidation tactics against someone whose only crime was being black while requesting service. Serena's voice carried the satisfaction of someone delivering long overdue justice. Ray's response was exactly what you'd expect from someone whose worldview was crumbling. I was just doing my job. Your job was to provide security, not to intimidate customers based on their race, Serena replied. Your job was to protect guests, not to threaten them. Your job was to ensure safety, not to create an atmosphere of fear for black customers. Each termination was being documented by Serena's legal team, creating records that would follow these employees throughout their careers. This wasn't just about firing racists. This was about ensuring that their racism had permanent professional consequences. The satisfaction was overwhelming. 5 people who had felt comfortable discriminating against a black customer were now facing the complete destruction of their careers at the hands of the very person they had discriminated against. Justice wasn't just being served, it was being served with compound interest. But the terminations were just the beginning of the consequences these employees would face. Serena had orchestrated something far more comprehensive than simple job loss. She had created a system of accountability that would follow them for the rest of their professional lives. Thompson addressed the group with the clinical precision of someone delivering a corporate death sentence. Your terminations will be reported to the Hospitality Industry Background Check database, he announced, ensuring that your racist behavior tonight will be discovered by any future employer in the industry. The Hospitality Industry Background Check database was the nuclear option in employment consequences. Every major hotel chain, restaurant group, and resort company used this system to screen potential employees. Having documented racism in that database was career death in hospitality. Bradford's face went ashen as he processed what this meant. But that's my entire career, he whispered. I've worked in hotels for 20 years. I don't know how to do anything else. That's exactly the point, Thompson replied with satisfaction. You spent 20 years in hospitality and never learned that discriminating against customers based on race was wrong. You used your position of authority to humiliate someone because of the color of her skin. You forfeited your right to work in this industry. Victoria's desperation reached new heights as she realized the scope of her professional destruction. Please, Miss Williams, I have a mortgage. I have car payments. I have responsibilities. I can't be blacklisted from the entire industry. You should have considered those responsibilities before you told a black customer she belonged in a homeless shelter, Serena replied, her voice carrying no sympathy whatsoever. You should have thought about your financial obligations before you accused someone of credit card fraud based on their race. The beautiful irony was that Victoria was now facing the kind of financial uncertainty she had assumed Serena couldn't handle. The woman who had questioned whether Serena could afford an $800 room was now wondering how she would make her own mortgage payments. Blake Morrison's destruction was particularly satisfying, given his condescending comments about room rates. Your assumptions about my financial status were not only racist, but spectacularly wrong, Serena told him with obvious satisfaction. You lectured me about $800 rooms, while speaking to someone who just spent $200 million to teach you about consequences. Blake's response revealed how completely he had misunderstood power dynamics in America. Miss Williams, how was I supposed to know you had that kind of money? That's exactly the problem, Blake, Serena replied. You made assumptions about my wealth based on my race. You decided I couldn't afford your services because I'm black. You provided different levels of courtesy based on skin color. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racism. Diana Harper, who had whispered jokes about Serena casing the place, was facing her own reckoning. Your suggestion that I was planning a robbery will be included in every background check you face for the rest of your career, Serena informed her. Any employer who Googles your name will find documented evidence that you assume black customers are criminals. Diana's attempt to minimize her racism revealed how little she understood about consequences. It was just a comment. I didn't really mean anything by it. Comments like that destroy lives, careers, and opportunities, Serena replied. You used your position in hospitality to perpetuate racist stereotypes. You created an atmosphere where black customers feel unwelcome, unsafe, and unwanted. Ray Coleman, the security guard, was learning that his threats of violence had consequences beyond imagination. Your eagerness to use physical force against a black customer has been documented and reported to law enforcement, Serena announced, causing Ray to take a step backward in fear. Reported to law enforcement, Ray repeated, his voice cracking with terror. Your behavior tonight constituted intimidation based on race, which is a federal civil rights violation, Thompson confirmed. You threatened a customer with violence because of her skin color. That's not just grounds for termination. That's grounds for prosecution. The scope of the consequences was becoming clear to everyone in that lobby. This wasn't just about losing jobs. This was about facing potential criminal charges, federal investigations, and permanent damage to their ability to earn a living. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the way their racism was being preserved for posterity. Every comment, every assumption, every discriminatory action was being documented with the kind of precision typically reserved for criminal evidence. Your behavior tonight will be studied in hospitality management courses as an example of how racism destroys careers, Serena announced. And every time someone learns about the cost of discrimination, they'll see your faces, your names, your documented racism as the cautionary tale. 5 people who had felt comfortable being racist were now becoming the permanent face of consequences in corporate America. Their names would be remembered not for their accomplishments, but for their discrimination. Their careers would be studied not as success stories, but as warnings about the price of prejudice. The transformation was complete, from confident racists to unemployed cautionary tales in less than 4 hours. But Serena Williams wasn't content with just destroying careers. She was committed to building something better from the ashes of the discrimination she had faced. Within 24 hours of the terminations, the Royal Sterling Resort began a transformation that would make it a model for inclusive hospitality. The new general manager was Maria Santos, a hospitality veteran with 15 years of experience in diversity and inclusion initiatives. Maria had built her career specifically on creating welcoming environments for guests of all backgrounds, someone who understood that luxury service meant making every customer feel valued and respected. Maria's first act as general manager was to address the remaining staff, many of whom were shocked by the sudden terminations and the revelation of the discrimination that had taken place. We are implementing immediate changes to ensure that what happened last night never happens again, she announced to the assembled employees. The new front desk manager was James Washington, a former civil rights advocate who had transitioned into hospitality because he believed that travel and accommodation should be accessible to everyone regardless of their background. James brought with him a track record of transforming discriminatory practices into inclusive excellence. "Our goal isn't just to avoid racism," James explained to the front desk staff during their first training session. "Our goal is to actively create an environment where every guest feels welcomed, valued, and respected from the moment they contact us." The head of security position went to Patricia Kim, a former law enforcement officer with specialized training in de-escalation and cultural competence. Patricia understood that security meant protecting all guests, not intimidating those who looked different from the hotel's typical clientele. "Security's role is to make guests feel safe, not to make them feel unwelcome," Patricia told her team. "We protect everyone equally, and we never use someone's race or appearance as a factor in how we treat them." But the changes went far beyond personnel. Serena implemented comprehensive bias training for every employee, not just at the Royal Sterling, but across her entire 40-hotel empire. She brought in experts from the Southern Poverty Law Center and the NAACP to develop programs that addressed unconscious bias, microaggressions, and the business case for inclusive service. Every employee now received 40 hours of annual training on cultural competence, inclusive hospitality, and the legal and ethical implications of discrimination. The training wasn't just theoretical. It included real scenarios, role-playing exercises, and accountability measures that ensured the lessons were learned and applied. Serena also established reporting mechanisms that allowed guests to document discrimination and ensured that complaints were taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and resulted in appropriate consequences. Her dedicated ombudsman position was created specifically to handle bias-related complaints and ensure they received immediate attention. The transformation of the Royal Sterling's culture was dramatic. Within 30 days, guest satisfaction scores had increased by 23%, as word spread through travel networks that the resort had become genuinely welcoming to all guests. Revenue increased, as diverse clientele who had previously felt unwelcome began booking stays and events. But perhaps the most significant change was in employee morale. The remaining staff, who had witnessed the discrimination and felt uncomfortable about it, were relieved to work in an environment that aligned with their values. New hires were specifically recruited for their commitment to inclusive service, not just their technical qualifications. 6 months after the discriminatory incident, the Royal Sterling hosted the International Conference on Inclusive Hospitality, the same event where Serena had originally been scheduled to speak as a guest, but now delivered as the owner of the venue that had once discriminated against her. Standing on the stage where she was supposed to have spoken as a visitor, Serena addressed 300 hospitality executives about the transformation that was possible when businesses committed to genuine change. "Discrimination isn't just morally wrong," Serena told the packed auditorium. "It's economically stupid. When you exclude customers based on prejudice, you're literally turning away money, you're damaging your brand, you're creating liability, and most importantly, you're perpetuating a cycle of hate that hurts everyone." The Royal Sterling had become more than just a luxury resort. It had become a symbol of what was possible when someone with power used that power to create positive change rather than perpetuate harmful systems. Other hotels throughout Miami began examining their own practices, implementing similar training programs, and creating more inclusive environments. What had started as one woman being denied a hotel room had become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. The ripple effects of that Thursday evening's discrimination were still spreading, but now they were creating positive change rather than perpetuating harmful prejudice. 1 year after the discrimination incident that changed everything, the Royal Sterling Resort had become the most requested venue for diversity and inclusion conferences in the hospitality industry. The hotel that had once practiced institutional racism was now teaching other businesses how to create genuinely welcoming environments. The transformation was so complete that it attracted attention from Harvard Business School, which developed a case study titled "From Discrimination to Excellence: The Royal Sterling Transformation." The case study was required reading in MBA programs across the country, teaching future business leaders about the cost of prejudice and the value of inclusive practices. Serena Williams had proven that the most powerful response to hate wasn't more hate. It was building something better. When Bradford and his staff showed her their character that night, she responded by showing them hers. And her character was defined not by revenge, but by the determination to ensure that no other customer would face what she had faced. The Royal Sterling's lobby now featured a permanent installation called the Dignity Wall, where guests could share stories of discrimination they had faced and the positive changes they wanted to see in the world. The installation had become one of the hotel's most photographed features, a symbol of transformation and hope. Maria Santos, the new general manager, had exceeded every performance metric in hospitality history. Under her leadership, the Royal Sterling achieved the highest guest satisfaction scores in its 40-year history. The hotel that had once turned customers away based on race was now turning away business because demand exceeded capacity. The former employees who had participated in the discrimination faced very different fates. Bradford never worked in hospitality again. After 18 months of unemployment, he took a part-time position at a discount retail store, where his racist assumptions about customers earned him termination within 6 weeks. Victoria Chase attempted to rebuild her career in hospitality, but the documented racism in her background check made her unemployable at every major hotel chain. She eventually left Miami and moved back to her hometown, where she worked at a small bed and breakfast that didn't conduct thorough background checks. Blake Morrison faced similar challenges. His condescending assumptions about customer finances followed him to every job interview. His attempt to start his own consulting business failed when potential clients discovered his racist history through online searches that revealed his documented discrimination. Diana Harper, who had suggested Serena was casing the place, struggled with the irony that her own career had been robbed by her racist assumptions. She eventually found work in a completely different industry, but the skills she had developed in hospitality were worthless when her racism made her unemployable in customer service. Ray Coleman, the security guard who had been eager to use physical intimidation, faced the most serious consequences. His threats against Serena had indeed been reported to federal authorities, and he was convicted of civil rights violations. The conviction made him unemployable in any security position, and he spent 2 years in federal prison. But the story's impact extended far beyond the fates of 5 racist employees. The Royal Sterling's transformation had inspired similar changes throughout the hospitality industry. Hotels across the country began implementing bias training, examining their own practices, and creating more inclusive environments. The conference that Serena had originally come to Miami to address had become an annual event, hosted permanently at the Royal Sterling Resort. Each year, hundreds of hospitality executives gathered to learn about inclusive service practices and the business case for treating every customer with dignity. During the second annual conference, Serena delivered a keynote address that summarized the lessons learned from that transformative Thursday evening. "Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need," she told the packed auditorium. "I needed to be reminded that there was still work to do, that success doesn't protect you from prejudice, but it does give you the power to fight back." She paused, looking out at the audience that included some of the most powerful people in American hospitality. The most important lesson isn't that racism has consequences, though it absolutely does. The most important lesson is that we have the power to build something better than what we inherited. The Royal Sterling Resort stood as proof that transformation was possible, that businesses could change, that systems built on exclusion could be rebuilt around inclusion. But more than that, it proved that sometimes the universe delivered justice with such precision that it restored your faith in the possibility of change. The woman who had been told she didn't belong now owned the place that had rejected her. The employees who had felt comfortable being racist were now case studies in consequences. And the hotel that had practiced discrimination was now a model for inclusive excellence. Perfect justice delivered with compound interest and a legacy that would inspire change for generations to come. Thank you for all the incredible comments and for subscribing to the channel. Stories like Serena's remind us that sometimes justice really does prevail and that the arc of the moral universe truly does bend toward justice. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue sharing stories of people who proved that dignity, determination, and the courage to fight back can change everything.